My name is Daniel Harper, and I've been married to Emily for 12 years. We live in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, in a house with cedar siding and a backyard that slopes into a tangle of blackberry bushes. She's a graphic designer, freelancing from home, and I manage a small chain of hardware stores my father left me. Life was predictable: mornings with coffee, evenings with takeout, and weekends tinkering with the old Mustang in the garage. Emily's laugh, sharp and bright, used to fill the gaps in our routine. I thought we were solid, a team against the mundane. But lately, her laugh had dulled, like a blade left too long in the rain. Started with the phone. She'd always been private about it, nothing unusual there. But this was different. She'd tilt the screen away when I walked by, her fingers moving too fast to be casual. I'd ask what she was working on, and she'd say, "Oh, just a client thing." Her voice clipped, her eyes avoiding mine. I didn't push. Trust, I told myself, was the backbone of us. But then came the late nights. She'd stay up, claiming deadlines, the blue glow of her laptop painting her face in the dark. I'd wake at 3 a.m., the bed cold, and find her downstairs, typing furiously, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. One Tuesday, I came home early. A shipment at the store had been delayed, and I figured I'd surprise her with Thai food from that place she loved on Hawthorne. The house was quiet when I stepped in. No hum of her music, no clatter of her keyboard. I called her name, my voice echoing off the hardwood. Nothing. Then I heard it, a low murmur from the back patio. I set the bags down and moved toward the glass door, my socks silent on the floor. Through the blinds, I saw her. Emily, my Emily, sitting cross-legged on the wicker couch, her phone pressed to her ear. She was smiling. Not the tired smile she gave me lately, but something alive, reckless. "I can't wait," she whispered, her voice soft and jagged, like she was confessing to the wind. I stood there, the takeout cooling on the counter, and listened. She didn't say much, just enough. "Tomorrow, then. Same place." A pause. "You make me feel, I don't know, new." My chest tightened. A slow crush I couldn't name. I didn't barge out there. I didn't yell. I backed away, grabbed my keys, and drove to the store. The whole way, her words looped in my head. New. What was I then? Old? Used up? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the garage, the Mustang's hood open, staring at the engine like it could tell me what to do. The next day, I didn't confront her. I watched. She left the house at noon, claiming a meeting with a client downtown. She wore that green dress, the one she hadn't touched in years, the one that hugged her hips like a memory. I followed her, my truck a block behind, my hands slick on the wheel. She didn't go downtown. She turned west, toward the coast, toward Cannon Beach. I stayed back, the road winding through pines, until she pulled into a gravel lot by a trailhead. A man was waiting, a tall guy, lean, with dark hair and a leather jacket. He leaned against a Jeep, arms crossed, grinning as she stepped out. They didn't shake hands. They didn't hesitate. She went straight into his arms, her body folding into his like it belonged there. I parked half a mile up the road, hidden by a curve of trees, and watched them through the windshield. My hands shook. Not with rage, not yet, but with something colder, something that sank into my bones like damp rot. Emily and this guy, this stranger, didn't waste time. They walked toward the trail, her hand in his, her head tilted up to him like she used to do with me on our first dates. I knew that look. It was hunger, need, a quiet plea for something I apparently couldn't give her anymore. The forest swallowed them, and I sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, my mind racing through every moment of the last 12 years. Had I missed it? Had she been slipping away this whole time? I didn't follow them into the woods. Couldn't. My legs wouldn't move, and my stomach churned like I'd swallowed gravel. Instead, I drove home, the Thai food still on the counter, its smell souring the air. I poured a whiskey, too much too fast, and started digging. Her laptop was locked, but her desk wasn't. In a drawer, beneath a stack of invoices, I found a notebook. Her handwriting, loopy and rushed, filled the pages. Dates, times, places. CB 1 p.m. CB sunset. Cannon Beach, I realized. She'd been meeting him for weeks, maybe months. There were sketches too. His face, angular and shadowed, his hands, long-fingered and rough. She'd drawn him like he was art, like he mattered. I didn't stop there. I went through her phone bill online. Thank God for shared accounts. A number, unlisted, appeared over and over. Late-night calls, quick texts, a pattern that matched the notebook. I called it from the landline, my pulse hammering. A man's voice answered, low and casual. Hey, you. I hung up, my breath shallow. It was him. I knew it. I spent the rest of the day piecing it together, cross-referencing her client meetings with the calls, the sketches, the lies. She came home at dusk, her cheeks flushed, her hair tangled with salt air. Long day, she said, kissing my cheek. I nodded, my jaw tight, and said nothing. That night I planned. Revenge wasn't a word I'd ever lived by. I'm not that guy. I fix things, build things, not destroy them. But this was different. She'd taken something from me, not just her loyalty, but my trust in the world, my belief that we were real. Couldn't let it stand. I needed her to feel what I felt, to lose what I'd lost. But it had to be slow, deliberate, a cut so deep she'd never see it coming. I started small. I hacked her email. Years of shared passwords made it easy and found messages. His name was Ryan. Ryan Kessler, a photographer she'd met at a gallery show last fall. You're my escape, she'd written. He's my anchor, he'd replied. Anchor. I laughed. A dry, broken sound. I didn't sleep again. I sat in the dark, the whiskey bottle empty, and thought about anchors. How they hold you steady, sure, but how they can drag you under too. By morning, I had the first piece of my plan. Ryan Kessler had a life, clients, a studio, a reputation. I'd start there. I'd unravel him thread by thread and let her watch. But I'd be careful. She couldn't know it was me. Not yet. I called in sick, drove to the store, and used the office computer to dig deeper. Social media, reviews, his website. He was good, too good. Arrogant about it, too. Perfect. The next week was a blur of watching and waiting. Emily kept up her act. Breakfast together, small talk about her projects, a peck on the lips before I left for work. But I saw the cracks now. Her eyes darted to her phone too often. Her smiles were rehearsed, and when she hugged me, her arms felt like they were already letting go. I played along, kept my voice steady, my face blank. Inside, I was mapping every move. Ryan Kessler lived in Astoria, an hour from Cannon Beach, in a loft above his studio. His Instagram was full of moody shots. Waves crashing, driftwood twisted like bones, and, buried in the grid, a photo of Emily. She was laughing, her hair whipping in the wind, captioned only with a wave emoji. My stomach lurched, but I saved the image. I started with his clients. His website listed testimonials, local businesses, a couple of galleries, a brewery. I knew people in those circles. Hardware stores give you connections. I made calls, casual at first. Hey, you work with that Kessler guy? How's he been lately? Most were vague. Praise for his eye, his timing, but one guy, a bar owner named Pete, paused too long. He's talented, Pete said. But flaky. Missed a shoot last month. Said he was sick. But I saw him at the pier with some woman. I thanked him and hung up, my pulse quickening. Flaky. That was a thread I could pull. I created a fake email, nothing traceable, and sent inquiries to his clients, posing as a competitor. Heard Ryan's been dropping the ball. I wrote. We'd love to step in. I attached a doctored screenshot. A canceled invoice, his signature forged from a contract I'd found online. It wasn't enough to tank him, not yet, but it planted doubt. I watched his inbox through a backdoor I'd found in Emily's email chain. Paranoia pays off, and saw the replies trickle in. We're happy with Ryan, but thanks. He's been fine so far. Fine wasn't good enough. I needed cracks, not courtesy. Meanwhile, Emily was slipping further. She'd leave the house more often. Errands, she said, or coffee with a friend. I tracked her phone once, a trick I'd learned from a YouTube video, and saw her linger at a motel off Highway 101. I didn't drive there. I didn't need to. The image burned anyway, her and Ryan, tangled in some cheap room, her green dress crumpled on the floor. I poured that into my plan. I found his studio's lease online, public records are a gold mine, and called the landlord, pretending to be a city inspector. "We've had complaints," I said, deepening my voice. "Noise, loitering. You might want to check in." The guy grumbled but promised to look. Another thread pulled. By Friday I had a rhythm. Mornings at the store, afternoons unraveling Ryan, nights watching Emily lie. She came home late that day, her lips swollen, her excuse flimsy. "Spilled wine at dinner," she said, brushing past me. I nodded, poured her a glass and smiled. She didn't notice my hands trembling. That night I escalated. I found Ryan's portfolio on a stock photo site, hundreds of images, his name watermarked. I uploaded duplicates to free sites, diluted his control, let them spread. It wouldn't ruin him, but it'd sting. A slow bleed. I leaned back in my chair, the screen glowing, and felt the first flicker of something like satisfaction. This was just the beginning. The weekend hit, and Emily suggested a hike. "We haven't done anything together in ages," she said, her voice light, like she was tossing me a lifeline. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see her up close, to study the woman I'd married against the one I'd lost. We drove to Multnomah Falls, the mist rising off the rocks, the air sharp with pine. She wore hiking boots and that green dress under a jacket, a combination that made no sense unless you knew she was dressing for someone else's eyes. I carried the backpack, water, snacks, a blanket, and trailed her up the trail, my boots heavy on the dirt. She talked more than usual, pointing out birds, snapping photos of the waterfall. I wondered if she'd send them to Ryan later, a little proof of her normal life. Halfway up, she slipped, and I caught her arm. Her skin was warm, her pulse fast under my fingers. "Thanks," she said, smiling that old smile, and for a second, I almost forgot. Almost. We ate at the top, the valley sprawling below us, and she leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. Should have felt good. Didn't. All I could think was how her hair smelled like the ocean, like Cannon Beach, like him. Back home, I doubled down. Ryan's landlord had emailed him. I'd spoofed an address to monitor it, warning about the complaints. Ryan's reply was curt. "No idea what you're talking about. I'll handle it." Good luck, I thought. I dug into his taxes next, public records again, a little creative searching. He'd claimed deductions for equipment that didn't match his income. Sloppy. I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS, a burner email, a nudge. Nothing immediate, but it'd linger, a shadow over his books. Then I hit his social circle. A fake profile. Some guy named Jake, rugged artsy, started commenting on his posts. "Heard you're slipping, man. Too busy chasing tail." Crude, sure, but it got traction. His followers laughed, some piled on. Doubt was spreading. Emily noticed nothing. She was too deep in her bubble. Texts at dinner, a quick shower after errands. Her lies piling up like driftwood. Monday, I took a day off and drove to Astoria. His studio was a brick building, all glass and grit, with a sign, Kessler Photography. I didn't go in. I sat across the street, coffee going cold, and watched. He came out at noon, leather jacket slung over his shoulder, laughing with a woman who wasn't Emily. My grip tightened on the cup. Was he playing her too? Or was this just his life, women, art, no anchors? I snapped photos, blurry but clear enough, and filed them away. Evidence, maybe. Leverage, definitely. That night I cooked steak, her favorite, and kept her glass full. She relaxed, talked about a new project, laughed at my bad jokes. I almost felt guilty. Almost. After she went to bed, I hacked her cloud storage, another shared password, and found photos. Her and Ryan, tangled on a beach, her legs draped over his hand on her thigh. My throat closed. I didn't delete them. I copied them, saved them, let them fuel me. Revenge wasn't about confrontation, not yet. It was about control, about taking back what she'd stolen. I wasn't ready to show my hand, but I was building my deck. By midweek, The cracks in Ryan's life were widening. His landlord had visited, saw it in an email rant he'd sent a friend, and found evidence I'd planted. A bag of trash, cigarette butts, left by his door the night before. Small, petty, but it stuck. The lease was month to month. The guy was threatening to end it. Good. I kept pushing Jake too. More comments, more digs. Dude's a flake. Jake wrote under a shot of Haystack Rock. Ryan fired back, mind your business, bro. But the damage was done. His replies were getting shorter, his posts less frequent. He was rattled. Emily was unraveling too, though she hid it better. She'd snap at me over nothing. Burnt toast, a misplaced sock. Then apologize too fast, her eyes glassy. Guilt, maybe, or fear. I didn't care which. Thursday, she left early, mumbling about a deadline. I followed again, this time to the motel. I parked far off, watched her slip into room 12. Ryan's Jeep already there. I didn't storm in. I waited. An hour later, they came out, her hair mussed, his shirt untucked. I took more photos, my hands steady now. Back home, I printed them, crisp and sharp, and tucked them into the Mustang's glove box. A trophy, a promise. That night, I struck harder. Ryan's website had a contact form, Child's Play, to flood it. I wrote scripts, sent hundreds of junk messages. Your work sucks. Overpriced hack. Lose my number. His inbox would choke, his patience would fray. I mirrored it with his phone. Spoofed calls from random numbers, silent hang-ups, enough to keep him up. Emily came home late, exhausted, and I asked how her day was. Fine, she said, her voice flat. I smiled, handed her tea, and let her sip in silence. She didn't know I was in her head. Her life, her lover's life, pulling strings she couldn't see. Friday, I met a guy at the store, a regular ex-cop named Vic. Over coffee, I floated a hypothetical. What's the worst way to mess with someone without breaking the law? Vic grinned, leaned in. Ruin their name, he said. Spread whispers, jobs, friends, family. People believe what they hear if it's loud enough. I nodded, filed it away. Ryan's name was next. I'd make it Ash. Emily slept beside me that night, her breathing soft, and I stared at the ceiling, my mind a machine. She'd betrayed me with a real person, a living, breathing mistake. I'd bury them both. Not with my hands, but with my will. Step by step, piece by piece. Saturday morning, the house felt like a tomb. Silent, heavy. The air thick with her perfume lingering from the night before. Emily was in the shower, humming some tune I didn't recognize, and I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands. The photos from the motel stared up at me from the table, printed and spread out like a crime scene. Her smile in them, wide, unguarded, cut deeper than I'd expected. I'd seen that smile before, years ago, when we'd camped by the Columbia River, her hair wet from swimming, her eyes locked on mine. Now it belonged to Ryan Kessler, and I hated her for giving it away. I hid the photos back in the Mustang before she came downstairs. Her hair damp, her demeanor too bright. Let's do something today, she said, pouring cereal. Maybe the farmer's market? I agreed, my voice steady, my mind elsewhere. At the market, she wandered ahead, picking through apples, chatting with vendors, while I trailed behind, watching her like a stranger. Every laugh, every gesture felt rehearsed, a performance for me or for the guilt gnawing at her. I bought her a bouquet of dahlias, her favorite, and she hugged me, her arms loose. You're sweet, she said, and I smiled, imagining those flowers wilting on Ryan's grave. Back home, I escalated. Ryan's studio was my next target. I'd found his electricity account. Public utility records are sloppy with privacy, and called in a false report. Flickering lights, a burning smell. By Monday, they'd shut it off for inspection. I pictured him fumbling in the dark, cursing, his precious gear useless. Then I hit his clients again. Using Jake. I posted reviews, 2 stars, vague gripes about missed deadlines, blurry prints. Nothing provable, just enough to itch. One client bit. A gallery owner emailed him, asking about a delayed project. His reply was frantic. On it, I swear. And I savored it, a crack widening. Emily spent the afternoon working. Her laptop screen tilted away again. I didn't ask. I waited until she napped. Wine at lunch made her drowsy and checked her phone. Unlocked, careless. Texts from Ryan. Miss you already. Powers out, nightmare. Her replies. Poor baby. Come over later? My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I didn't delete them. I screenshotted, saved, added them to my growing archive. She woke up, stretched, and I handed her a glass of water, my face a mask. Good nap? I asked. She nodded, oblivious, and I turned away, my plan sharpening. That night, I drove to Astoria. His studio was dark, a yellow notice taped to the door. Power off, pending review. I parked across the street, watched the windows. A light flickered upstairs. Candles, maybe, or a flashlight. He was home. Good. I left a package by his door. Anonymous, no prints. A box of dead fish from the market, their stink seeping through the cardboard. Petty? Sure. But it had hit him where he lived. A stench he couldn't ignore. I drove back, the ocean air cold through the window, and felt the first real rush of control. This was my game now. Sunday, Emily was restless. She paced the kitchen, checked her phone too often, her excuses thin. Clients freaking out, she said, grabbing her keys. I'll be back by dinner. I nodded, waved her off, and tracked her dot again. Straight to Astoria. I didn't follow. I knew where she was going, who she'd be with. Instead, I worked. Ryan's website was next. I'd learned a trick from a tech guy at the store, SQL injection, simple stuff if you're patient. His contact form was vulnerable. I flooded his database with junk, crashed the site. By noon, it was down. A blank page greeting his clients. Another thread snapped. I called Vic, the ex-cop, met him at a diner off I-5. Over greasy eggs. I pushed my hypothetical further. What if it's personal? I asked, keeping it vague. Someone who deserves it? Vic chewed, thoughtful. Go for the soft spots, he said. Money, pride, relationships. Make him feel hunted. I nodded, paid the bill, and left with a blueprint. Ryan's pride was his art, already bleeding. His money was next. I found his bank, guessed from a receipt in Emily's email, and reported a lost card, spoofing his number. They'd freeze his account, a hassle he'd scramble to fix. Small, cruel, perfect. Emily came home late, her eyes red, her story flimsy. Traffic, she muttered, avoiding me. I cooked anyway, pasta, garlic bread, kept her talking. She rambled about a design glitch, her hands fidgeting. I wondered if Ryan had told her about the fish, the power, the site. I hoped he had. I wanted her to feel it creeping in, even if she didn't know why. After dinner, she crashed early, and I went to the garage, the Mustang's engine my sanctuary. I pulled up his Instagram, still active but quieter. Jake commented again. Studio's toast, huh? Karma's a beast. Likes piled up. I grinned, sharp and cold. Monday, I checked his email again. Emily's backdoor still worked. The gallery owner had pulled out, citing reliability issues. Ryan's reply was a mess. Angry, pleading, unprofessional. I forwarded it to his other clients, anonymous, let them see him unravel. Then I hit his car. His Jeep was registered. DMV records aren't hard to skim. And I called in a tow, claiming it was abandoned near the beach. They'd haul it, he'd pay, he'd fume. I pictured him stranded. Emily driving to save him, their little bubble shrinking. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was progress. I kept my routine, work, home, smiles for her. She didn't suspect. She couldn't. I was the anchor, steady and dull, while Ryan was her storm. But storms pass, and anchors endure. I'd make sure of it. That night, I dreamed of her face. Her real face, not the one she wore for me now. Twisted in confusion, in loss. It woke me up, sweating, and I liked it. Tuesday, Emily was off again. Another meeting. I let her go, tracked her to the motel, and stayed home, my hands busy with the next move. Ryan's Jeep was impounded. I'd called to confirm, posing as him, and his emails were frantic. "I need cash," he wrote to a friend. "Everything's falling apart." I smiled, picturing him pacing that stinking loft, the fish rotting in his trash. I hit his phone next. More spoofed calls, dozens all hours. Sleep would dodge him, his nerves would fray. I wanted him jumpy, brittle, a man on the edge. Then I turned to Emily's world. Her clients, real ones, were in her email, a list I'd copied. I sent subtle messages from a fake account posing as a colleague. "Heard you're distracted lately?" I wrote to one. "Project's late. Everything okay?" Another got, "Your designer's been spotty. Need a backup." Nothing direct, just whispers. Her reputation mattered to her. I'd chip at it, let her feel the weight. She came home that night, distracted, snapping at me over a spilled glass. "I'm fine," she said, too sharp. I nodded, cleaned it up, and watched her retreat to her laptop. Wednesday, I went bigger. Ryan's landlord was done. Eviction notice drafted, emailed that morning. I'd nudged it along. Another inspection call. More fake complaints. He'd be out in 30 days, his studio gone. I hacked his cloud next. Emily's photos gave me the link and downloaded his portfolio. Years of work, raw files, his pride. I didn't delete them. I leaked them, free sites, torrents everywhere. His art, once exclusive, now cheap and scattered. He'd notice soon, and when he did, he'd panic. I wanted that panic to spill over, to stain her too. She was quieter now, her phone buzzing less. I wondered if he'd told her, if they were fighting. Good. Thursday, I met a guy at the store, a locksmith, chatty, and got a tip. Duplicate keys are easy if you've got access. Emily's car keys hung by the door. I made copies, stashed them, a possibility for later. I didn't know how yet, but I'd find a use. That night, she cooked. Rare for her lately, and I ate, complimented her, kept her close. She softened, leaned into me on the couch. "I've been a mess," she said, her voice small. "Work's crazy." I stroked her hair, murmured agreement, and planned her ruin. By Friday, Ryan's life was a tangle. His site was still down, his Jeep gone, his studio doomed. Jake posted again. "Heard you're homeless soon." Rough. His followers, fewer now, poked fun, some unfollowed. I sent a package to his loft. More fish. This time with a note. "Smell the future." No signature, no trace. I wanted it in his head, under his skin. Emily came home late, her face drawn, and I asked how Ryan was. She froze, eyes wide. "What?" she stammered. "Your client." I lied, smooth as glass. "The photographer guy." She relaxed, barely, and mumbled, "He's fine." I smiled, poured her wine, and let her drown in it. Saturday, the air shifted. Emily stayed home, unusual for her, pacing the house like a caged thing. Her phone stayed silent, no buzz, no glow. I watched her from the garage, pretending to polish the Mustang, my eyes on her through the window. She chewed her nails, stared at nothing, her mask slipping. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Ryan's silence told me enough. My moves were landing, hard. His power was back on, I checked. But the damage was done. His clients were drifting, his art was everywhere. His loft was ticking toward eviction. He was a ghost of himself, and she felt it. I kept pushing. His bank account was still frozen. Another lost card call. Another delay. I drained him slow, let him scramble for cash he didn't have. Then I hit his family. A sister in Seattle, found through Facebook, got an anonymous message. "Your brother's in trouble. Debts may be worse. Check on him." Vague, ominous, enough to stir worry. She called him. I saw the number in his logs. Left a voicemail he didn't answer. Good. Isolation was the goal. I wanted him alone, cut off, a man sinking in quicksand. Emily tried to hide it, but she was cracking. Sunday, she snapped at me over coffee. Spilled it, blamed me, stormed out. I cleaned up, waited, and checked her laptop while she showered. A draft email to Ryan. Unsent. "What's happening? You're scaring me." I left it, let it fester. That afternoon, I drove to Cannon Beach, parked by their trailhead, and left a gift. Her green dress, stolen from the laundry, torn and muddy, draped over his Jeep's hood. It was back from impound, barely, and I knew he'd find it. A message without words. I see you. Monday, I went nuclear on his reputation. A forum for local artists? Easy to join. Got a thread from Jake. Ryan Kessler's a fraud. Steals ideas. Flakes on gigs. Lives like a pig. I attached a photo, his loft door, the fish box, snapped from my last drop. The thread blew up, some defended him, most piled on. His name was mud now, searchable, stained. Clients emailed him, pulling projects. I watched it unfold through Emily's back door. She came home that night, pale, her hands shaking. Rough day, I asked casual. She nodded, said nothing, and locked herself in her office. I didn't stop. Tuesday, I mailed flyers, his face, his failure, his leaked art, to every gallery in Portland and Astoria. Anonymous, cheap, devastating. I called his phone from a burner, whispered, "You're done," and hung up. He'd unravel faster now, and she'd feel the pull. That night, she cried in her sleep, soft, broken sounds. I lay beside her, awake, and felt nothing but the hum of my plan. She'd built this betrayal with a real man, a fragile one. I'd tear him down, and her with him, brick by brick. Wednesday, Emily broke. She didn't leave the house, didn't work, just sat on the couch, staring at her phone like it might bite. It didn't ring. Ryan was a void now, his online presence gutted, his life a mess I'd sculpted. I checked his email that morning. Eviction confirmed, clients gone. A desperate plea to his sister unanswered. The flyers had hit. Galleries were blacklisting him. His Jeep was parked crooked outside his loft. The green dress still there, a tattered flag of his ruin. I'd won this round, but it wasn't enough. She hadn't felt it yet, not fully. I kept the pressure on. His phone got more calls, burners, random voices, static, threats. I wanted him paranoid, jumping at shadows. Then I hit her car. The spare key let me in. I drained the battery, loosened a tire, left it limping. She'd notice tomorrow, blame fate, not me. Small, petty, but it'd stack. That afternoon, I sent her clients more whispers. She's unreliable, distracted, dropping balls. One replied, "Thanks for the heads up." Her work, her pride would crumble too. Symmetry mattered. She tried to talk that night, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry I've been off," she said, stirring soup she wouldn't eat. "It's just a lot." I nodded, touched her hand, played the anchor. "We'll get through it," I said, my tone warm, my heart ice. She leaned into me, fragile, and I let her, plotting the next blow. Thursday, I mailed Ryan a package. Photos of him and Emily, motel shots, beach shots, her handwriting from the notebook photocopied. "You make me feel new." No note, just evidence. He'd see it, question her, implode. I wanted their trust to rot. Friday, she found the car. Dead, wobbling, and cursed, called a tow. I offered to help, drove her to work, kept her close. Her phone buzzed once, Ryan finally. She silenced it, her face tight. "Client," she lied. I smiled, dropped her off, and checked his email later. The package had landed. He'd written her, furious. "What is this?" "Who knows?" She hadn't replied. Good. Let them claw at each other. That night, she drank too much, rambled about stress, and I listened, poured more, waited. She passed out on the couch, and I stood over her, the woman I'd loved, now a stranger I'd break. I wasn't done. Ryan's sister showed up. I tracked her car online, banging on his door, yelling. He didn't answer. She left, furious. Another tie severed. His loft was dark, his Jeep unmoved. Emily's clients were pulling back. 2 projects canceled. Emails I'd nudged along. She'd feel it soon, the slow bleed of her life. I sat in the garage, the Mustang gleaming, and planned the endgame. Revenge wasn't loud. Not yet. It was quiet, cruel, a tide she'd drown in. I'd make her see, make her feel, make her lose everything she'd traded me for. Saturday morning, Emily woke late, her eyes swollen, her voice hoarse. The couch had creased her cheek, and she moved like a woman underwater. Slow, unsteady. "I'm a mess," she muttered, pouring coffee she didn't drink. I watched her, silent, the kitchen clock ticking between us. Her phone stayed dark. Ryan's silence was a weight she carried now. I'd checked his email at dawn. His sister had cut him off. His landlord had locked the loft. His Jeep was towed again for unpaid fines I'd tipped off. He was a shell and she was cracking under it. I offered toast, played the steady husband, and waited. She didn't leave the house. She sat at her desk, staring at blank screens, her fingers hovering over keys she didn't press. I slipped into the garage, pulled up her cloud, still open to me, and found new photos. Her and Ryan, older ones, from months back, her face alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. I printed them, added them to my stack, a gallery of her betrayal. Then I checked her clients. 3 more cancellations, whispers I'd sown bearing fruit. She'd notice soon, her career slipping through her fingers like sand. I wanted her to feel that loss, raw and real. That afternoon I drove to Astoria. His loft was empty, windows dark, a padlock gleaming on the door. The Jeep was gone, impounded again, and the green dress had vanished, probably trash now. I left one last gift. A letter, slipped under the door, typed, no trace. "She's next," it read. Simple, vague, enough to haunt him wherever he'd crawled to. I didn't care if he saw it, just that it lingered, a seed of dread. Back home, Emily was on the phone, her voice sharp. "What do you mean, pulled out?" she snapped. "Client, I guessed." I smiled, fixed the Mustang's carburetor, and let her stew. Sunday she broke down. She paced, cried, yelled at me over nothing. A burnt pan, a missing pen. "I can't do this," she sobbed, collapsing on the couch. I held her, murmured comfort, my arms a trap. "What's wrong?" I asked, soft, probing. She shook her head, wouldn't say. I knew. Ryan was gone. His email showed a bounced rent check, his phone disconnected. Her lifeline had snapped, and her work was crumbling. I poured her wine, kept her talking, let her spill. "Everything's falling apart," she whispered. I nodded, stroked her hair, and planned the kill shot. That night I finalized it. Her car, still broken, got a tweak. Sugar in the tank, slow ruin, untraceable. Her laptop got a virus. Slipped in via a fake client email, her files locked, her backups wiped. Small, cruel, stacking blows. I wanted her helpless, stranded, her world shrinking to match mine. She slept, unaware, and I sat in the dark, the Mustang's keys in my hand, feeling the weight of what I'd built. She traded me for Ryan, a real man, a fragile one. It crushed him. Now it was her turn. Monday, Emily tried to rally. She dressed, grabbed her laptop, called for a ride. Her car wouldn't start, the tire still loose, the engine choking on my sabotage. "I'll handle it," I said, and she nodded, distracted. Her ride dropped her at a cafe downtown. I followed, parked a block away, watched her through the window. She opened her laptop, froze, her face draining. The virus had hit, files gone. Screen locked, a ransom note I'd crafted blinking. Pay or lose it all. She wouldn't pay, she couldn't. I drained her savings. Fished her account weeks ago, moved it slow, untraceable. She was broke, broken, and didn't know why. I drove to the store, kept my routine, let her flail. She texted me at noon. "Laptop's dead. Car's trash. I'm screwed." I replied, "Rough day. I'll fix the car tonight." She didn't answer. I checked her email. Clients furious, deadlines missed, her excuses thin. One wrote, "We're done. Unreliable." Her phone buzzed with Ryan's ghost. No calls, just echoes of his collapse. I'd mailed him those photos days ago. They'd landed, I was sure. He'd vanished. Sister gone, loft lost, art worthless. She was alone now, tethered to me, the anchor she'd mocked. That night, she came home in a cab, her eyes hollow. "Everything's gone," she said, voice flat. "Work, money, all of it." I hugged her, played the rock, Asked questions she dodged. Bad luck? I said, and she nodded, too tired to fight. I fixed her car, undid the sugar, tightened the tire, kept her dependent. Tuesday, I pushed harder. Her portfolio site, her lifeline, crashed. I'd hacked it, mirrored her virus. Her clients saw a blank page, her name fading. I sent emails from Jake to her contacts. She's a mess. Steer clear. Her phone rang, creditors I tipped off with fake debts. She hung up, trembling, and I watched, silent, satisfied. Wednesday, she didn't get up. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her spirit gutted. I brought her tea, sat beside her, let her lean on me. I don't know what's happening, she whispered. It's like a curse. I nodded, squeezed her hand, and lied. We'll figure it out. She didn't see the Mustang's glove box, stuffed with her photos, her notebook, her ruin. Ryan was a memory, a man I'd erased piece by piece. She was next, not with noise, but with silence, with loss. I'd taken her lover, her work, her pride. One step left. That night, I mailed her a package. Anonymous, no return. Inside, the photos, her sketches, a note. You chose him. Look at you now. I wanted her to see it, to feel it, to know. Not that it was me, just that it was real, that her betrayal had claws. She'd find it tomorrow. I'd watch her fall. Thursday, the package arrived. I timed it, left early, tracked the delivery, came home at noon. Emily was in the kitchen, the box open, photos scattered on the table. Her face was ash, her hands shaking as she held a sketch. Ryan's face, her lines, her words. You make me feel new. She didn't hear me come in. I stood in the doorway, silent, watching her unravel. What's that? I asked, casual, stepping closer. She flinched, swept the papers into the box, stammered. Nothing. Junk mail. Her eyes were wild, her lie thin. I nodded, didn't push, let her squirm. She didn't eat, didn't speak, just sat there, staring at the box like it might burn her. I cooked chicken, rice, kept her near, my presence a weight. Rough week, I said, pouring water. She nodded, mute, her fingers twitching. I knew what she saw. Those motel shots, her laugh, his hands, her life before I torched it. Ryan was gone, his phone dead, his loft empty, his name mud. She'd lost him, her work, her savings, and now her secrets stared back at her. I'd stripped her bare, and she didn't even know my hand. Friday, she tried to fight. She called clients, begged, her voice cracking. I can fix it, she said over and over. They hung up. Her reputation was ash. My whispers too loud. Her car broke again. Battery dead, my tweak. And she cursed, stranded. I fixed it, kept her close, watched her shrink. That night she drank too much and talked, rambling, sloppy. I messed up, she slurred, head in her hands. Someone knows. Someone hates me. I listened, nodded, let her drown. Bad luck, I said again, my voice a blade she didn't feel. Saturday, I tightened the noose. Her email got a flood, hundreds of messages. Junk I'd scripted, clogging her inbox, burying her pleas. Her phone rang, debt collectors, fake claims I'd planted, demanding cash she didn't have. She screamed, threw it, the screen cracking on the floor. I picked it up, set it aside, played the savior. We'll sort it. I lied, my hand steady. She collapsed, sobbing, and I held her, her tears soaking my shirt. Inside, I burned, not with rage, but with triumph. She'd chosen Ryan, a real man, over me. Now she had nothing. Sunday, she barely moved. The box sat untouched, a ghost on the table. I left it there, let it fester. Her world was rubble. Career gone. Lover vanished. Pride shredded. I'd taken it all, slow and cruel, without a shout, without a mark. She leaned on me, fragile, dependent, the anchor she'd scorned. I cooked, cleaned, smiled, and planned the final twist. One last cut, deep and quiet, to seal her fall. Monday, Emily was a shadow. She shuffled through the house, her hair tangled, her eyes dull. The box was gone. Hidden, maybe burned, but its weight stayed, pressing her down. She didn't work, didn't call, just sat by the window, staring at rain that matched her mood. I kept my rhythm. Coffee, store, home. Kept her tethered. Feeling better? I asked, handing her tea. She shook her head, sipped, said nothing. Her phone was dead, cracked, unpaid, useless. Her laptop was locked, her files lost. She was stranded, and I was her only shore. I checked Ryan one last time. His email bounced, account closed. His Instagram was dark, his name a whisper in forums, a cautionary tale. I'd erased him, studio art, life. Left him nothing but the photos I'd sent, a mirror of his ruin. Emily didn't know where he'd gone. I didn't care. He was a footnote, a man she'd gambled on and lost. Now it was her turn to pay the full price. I'd taken her world, piece by piece, but she needed to see it, to feel it in her bones. Tuesday, I set the stage. I called her bank, spoofed her number, her voice a trick of software. Cancelled her cards, claimed fraud. They'd shut her out, another lifeline snapped. Then I hit her friends. Anonymous texts from a burner. She's lying to you. Ask about Ryan. Vague, sharp, enough to stir doubt. One replied, "What's this about?" I didn't answer, let it spread. Her car got a final touch. Slashed tires, subtle cuts, blamed on vandals. She'd wake to it helpless, trapped. I wanted her isolated, her every step a struggle. Wednesday it landed. She found the tires, cursed, called me at the store. "Someone slashed them," she said, voice shaking. "I can't deal with this." I drove home, fixed it, spare tires, slow repair, kept her leaning. Her bank called, cards dead, account frozen. She argued, cried, got nowhere. Her phone buzzed, friends, distant now, asking questions she couldn't answer. "What's going on?" one texted. She didn't reply, just stared, her hands limp. I watched, cooked dinner, let her sink. "Bad luck," I said, my mantra, my shield. That night, I left the glove box open, just a crack, the photos peeking out. She didn't see, not yet, but she would. I wanted her to find them, to wonder, to fear. She drank again, passed out, and I sat in the garage, the Mustang humming under my hands. Revenge wasn't loud. It was this, her life in shards, her trust in me a lie, her betrayal a wound. I turned back on her. She'd chosen Ryan, a real man, over me. Now she had neither, just an anchor dragging her down. Thursday, Emily found the photos. I'd gone to work, left the garage door ajar, the glove box unlatched. She texted me at noon, her words a mess. "What are these? Why do you have them?" I didn't reply, let her stew. I drove home slow, the rain heavy, my pulse steady. She was in the kitchen, the photos spread out, her face a ruin, tear-streaked, hollow. "Daniel," she said, voice breaking, "explain this." I shrugged, set my keys down, met her eyes. "Found them," I said, flat. "Guess you've been busy." She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The evidence was there, her and Ryan, her sketches, her lies. "It's not what you think," she stammered, grasping. I laughed, cold, sharp. "Don't," I said. "I know." She sank to the floor, sobbing, begging. "Sorry. So sorry, it was a mistake." I didn't yell, didn't touch her. I stood over her, the anchor she'd forgotten, and let her words bounce off me. "You chose him," I said, quiet, final. "Look where it got you." Friday she packed. Not much, just clothes, a bag, her broken phone. Her laptop stayed, dead. Her car limped, barely hers. She called a friend, one still talking to her, begged a ride. I didn't stop her. "Where will you go?" I asked, leaning on the counter. She didn't answer, just stared, her eyes searching mine for something I'd buried. She left at dusk, the cab's taillights fading, and I stood in the doorway, the house empty, the silence mine. She'd lost everything. Ryan, her work, her home, me. I'd taken it all, slow and cruel, a revenge she'd never trace. Saturday I cleaned. Her desk, Her sketches, her perfume, gone, scrubbed out. The Mustang gleamed, my sanctuary, my witness. I checked Ryan one last time, nothing, a void. He'd vanished, broken by my hand. Emily was the same, adrift, a ghost of herself. I'd made her feel it. The betrayal she'd built with a real man turned back on her tenfold. No shouts, no blood, just ruin, quiet and complete. I poured a whiskey, sat in the dark, and smiled. The anchor held. Sunday, the world moved on. I worked, ate, slept, the routine mine again. She'd call, maybe or write, some plea, some excuse. I wouldn't answer. She'd chosen, she'd lost, and I'd won. Not with fists, but with will, with patience, with a cruelty she'd never see coming. The house was still, the blackberry bushes wild out back, and I was alone, whole, steady, free.